Hello, welcome, Bobby Hulme-Lippert. How fun to welcome you back into something Claremont related.
Super fun. Very excited about for this. So thank you, Megan.
Yeah, you are so welcome. We are really excited to have an opportunity just to hype your book. Um, it is it is small stories about big things. I'm not even sure if this is gonna go the right direction in the video, but um, it's a collection of essays that some of us have read a few of because you started a Substack a number of years ago to start putting some of these stories down on paper, so to speak. So tell us a little bit about how you started, when you started writing. I mean, a lot of us as pastors are already writers because we have to write that pesky 3,000 word sermon every week. But
Yes.
talk to us about how this started.
Yes. Part of it, that the habit of sermons Sunday to Sunday, I had an anchoring in just regular writing. I will say, though, it was in my Claremont days, I actually started a blog that all of four people once read. And I stuck with it for about mm, a month. And it was just such a heavy lift. Even though I knew I liked writing, it was a heavy lift. And I figured out when I really started doing this Substack a couple years ago that the heavy lift was mainly fear.
Mm.
What are people going to think when I actually put myself out there in the world? And it's always going to be different, and there's going to be typos and points that don't really hit home, and all the things I could think of. But the pandemic sort of invited that inner conversation that I had with others. Like, you really do love writing, and why
Yeah.
don't you come home to that and
Yes.
just offer that gift and let it be what it is. And I think the pandemic also cleared out some of those fears, and I just was like, all right, we're just gonna go for it, whether one person reads it or a few dozen or whatever. I'm just gonna go for it.
Yeah. Yeah. So there's something unique though about your approach.
Yeah.
Um, you named it "Small Stories About Big Things," and it is just that. It You start out with just a little story from everyday life, and then connect it to a larger story, the larger story, perhaps we would say.
Yeah.
Tell me about a couple of your favorite stories that are in the book.
Absolutely. First, I can also thank Claremont for this. I would sit in that library as an associate pastor and work so hard to get the right answer for
Mm,
the sermon, the
yeah,
doctrinally correct, all the things. And it was good. It was good. But inevitably, you all would feed back to me the stories that were sticking, that captured a lot of the truth, but it was the stories that were somehow communicating at the heart level. And it was Claremont that taught me that how deep and rich a story can be. So one,
mm.
thank you. Small stories do make a big thing kind of point. Two, a couple favorites. I think, did you know that you're in a jazz band?
Did
Is a
you know you're in a
favorite.
jazz band?
That's like maybe the third or fourth one in, and it really is just this idea that long time I learned how to play the notes as they're written on a page as a trumpet player,
Hmm.
but the real gift emerged both in music and life when you discover the notes that are not there and you risk
Yeah.
the improv.
Yes.
And the other ones, there's a couple, but probably love in two syllables.
Mm,
I wrote that in all of maybe 15 minutes in a parking lot, uh, crying the whole time, and it's about my mom.
mm. Yeah. Yeah. Um, that's funny that you say that you wrote it in 15 minutes in a parking lot because I definitely have those moments where I'm hitting the
Yeah.
record feature on my notes app while I'm driving and, get a good paragraph or two down. What has be as you have you done more writing, what has become your process? Are you trying to sit down and write every single day, or is it more you write when you're inspired?
Good question. There's a story in there called Stumble Unto the Sacred. And it's actually a story about a conversation with George Miranda, but he's not named in the story, but he knows. And it's about what I discovered as my best sermon writing process was to just start writing my way into it and discovering where this needed to go. As a writer,
Yeah.
in now all the different ways, I'm discovering that emotion is the door. If I notice
Yeah.
a little uptick in my something, energy, sadness, joy,
Yes.
confusion, I will just start typing into that door, and honestly, I will discover the story. I most of them I don't actually know what the arc of it is until I just walk through the door of, again, whatever emotion has prompted.
Oh, isn't that the truth? I recently wrote a piece on this hike that we did in Scotland to the fairy pools. And I
Ooh.
thought that I was writing about that the sort of elusive thing that we chase
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
because it was foggy, it keeps going. There are all these little pools along the way, and you keep wondering, have we arrived at the pool? Are we there yet? Kind of thing.
Uh-huh.
And
Uh-huh.
and what emerged was actually much more of a reflection on our guys and how they are, almost all full grown men, but at the same time, those little boys emerge, especially when there are moving water and rocks and
Yes.
anything like that. But it was so fascinating to me to realize that what emerged on the page is not what I had sat down to write about.
Yes, yes, yes. Yeah, that is the honest truth about most of our most insightful, best writing. We have to follow
Yeah.
where it needs to go. Yeah.
Now you've made a shift. You're doing coaching and speaking and
Mhm.
obviously writing. Um,
Yeah.
Tell us a little bit about some of the doors that have opened for you as you've made this shift out of pastoral ministry into a larger kind of ministry that's rooted in the world, coaching individuals,
Mhm.
doing writing that is more. I don't want to say accessible, but certainly writing that is less defined, shall we say? Tell us a little about
Yes.
that shift that's taken place.
Yes. Well, I will say it's definitely been a call by God into the wilderness.
Mm.
There was a sense I was very much at home in leadership in the Presbyterian Church as a teenager, all the way through um, my adult years. But long story short, kept feeling this nudge to offer the gifts God's given me in a different setting, in places where maybe folks won't necessarily go to church, or not right now. It's not on the radar. And I'm discovering that story is easily the most powerful bridge
Mm.
into these spaces. In coaching, I continue to find that helping people name their own stories, their own kind of key metaphors for the life, proves a deeply impactful process, even healing process for them, when you
Mhm.
can just kind of name where you are and then where you want to go. So that's been really cool. Um, and then these stories, my book is in some ways, and people have said this back to me because I didn't intend it to be this at first. They're like, these kind of read like sermons, but they're not sermons. Yeah,
Mm.
and they're a bridge. They're a bridge into a world where, again, you may not understand all the churchese, but you do understand the fundamental stories, and you can hear certain values coming through. So that's been really cool. And again, there's a lot that confuses me about the world. I didn't realize how deeply invested in the church I was, and I think in good ways. But outside that, I'm learning that story is a singular bridge of connection that continues to be powerful.
Well, I mean, and so much of what is in scripture is story. In fact, I remember
Right.
a course that I took in graduate school on how adults are formed, the spiritual formation of
Yeah.
adults. And
Yeah.
our professor didn't make this term up, but referred to the Old Testament as really the core stories of the people of Israel, the stories
Yeah.
that they told over and over again to talk about how they encountered God and how that encounter with God changed and formed them. So it sounds like you're doing very similar work.
Yes. At some stories, if you're one of my followers on Substacks, I can't help myself. I think in a good way. I put in the footnote a
Yeah,
story from scripture that's like,
I
and this
just
is how
saw
it
that
relates.
last week. Yes, yeah,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
absolutely. So tell us, I mean, because we love you and know you and want to hear about the rest of your life. Tell us about how things are going with you and Michelle and the boys.
We are doing great. We live a little north of Austin, Georgetown, Texas, anymore kind of considered Greater Austin, the way this area has grown, and having fun. Leo's our oldest. He is 8. He's in third grade, and doing some basketball, some volleyball. I picked up the violin last month. That's our first instrument. So that's fun. Logan's 4, and he's a joy. He loves music. His little hips can just move to anything with wild abandon and big smiles. Um, and Michelle's great. We just celebrated 20 years of marriage this year, and she was for a
Amazing.
while a Spanish professor. She trained there at Emory while we were at Claremont, and then shifted about 4 or 5 years ago into technology, and works for a technology company these days. So
That's great. So I'll make you feel old and tell you that Scott was 8 when you met him.
okay. And here our Leo is 8. So now there it is.
Yeah,
Thank you.
yeah,
Thank you.
yeah. And Finn must
Oh,
have been almost 4. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. Oh, it's
So
awesome.
fun.
Remember throwing the ball with Finn in my office, and oh man, that's so fun.
Yeah. Oh yeah. So what's next? You've written this book. Are there more books to come? Is there a volume 2 of small stories about big things?
Two things. One, I'm doing more speaking at different conferences, little outlets, and I'm harnessing these stories
Mhm.
for bigger points that connect depending on the world. And so that's fun to have like a collection of stories that some of them are really great bridges into different settings. I do. I want to write now that I've experienced. I want to write another one. Yeah, I've got one sitting right now. It's called like the 15 sermons I didn't want to give, and
Mm.
that would be kind of telling the backstory of some of the harder moments over these last 15 years in our nation or our world, and what it was
Yeah.
leading up, that week leading up, behind the scenes to prepare a sermon for something like, you could think of some of the big moments. So, but that might be my own personal project. I've got some other ideas too, whether memoir-esque or leadership focused, but something I want to decide by the end of this year, so that I'm really working on that in 25.
So it sounds like you have a little bit of the publishing bug.
Yes, or yeah, or just actually, honestly, the joy of the process with the way and the intentionality about just showing up every week and offering
Mm.
something. Uh, how that rolls into I don't know, something that's deeply fulfilling
Yeah.
in and of itself.
Well, other than reading the book, here it is again. How can we, because we just believe so fully in you and your ministry, how can we support you?
Mm, very kind. I goodness, I don't know what I will say. The Substack has been such a blessing for me because of the number of folks at Claremont that follow along, read along, comment, or just send me an individual quick email or text, and those words of encouragement are just such a gift. And again, um, y'all were so formative in who I am as a just as a pastor, as a person, and again in that formative 20 something space where you're just figuring so much out and don't even realize you're figuring so much out. And so I mean, I just have the warmest place in the world in my heart for Claremont. And so yeah, anytime we have those little touch points of encouragement and back and forth, it is so fun for me. So thank you.
Oh, you are so welcome. It's so good to have an opportunity to hype your book a little bit with our congregation and to hear more about how you're doing these days. And we really hope that one day soon we'll be able to get you to come back to Claremont and bring the word,
Oh, that'd be fun.
bring a story. So
That'd be
good
fun.
to be with you. Hope to talk to you again soon.
Yes, thank you, Megan.